So, welcome and good morning to this session on how Agile is supporting Scotland's biodiversity. My name is Mark Kiehlmann and I'm an Agile coach with Calba. When I'm not Agile coaching, you'll find me ride my bicycle as a coach for British cycling, working with young athletes. But today, we're going to be talking about how Agile's supporting Scotland's biodiversity, and it's my privilege and honour to introduce to you two of the colleagues from NatureScot that I've been working with. Firstly, you're going to hear from Donald Fraser, Head of Wildlife Management at NatureScot. And Donald has spent his life living and working in the Scottish Highlands. And Donald can trace his heritage back 10 generations to the Highlands of Scotland. So he has a deep knowledge and understanding of the community and the geology in Scotland. And then you'll hear from Paul Main. And Paul Main is a deer policy officer at Nature Scotland. And Paul has a wide range of experience in senior leadership positions, not in Scotland, but south of Scotland in a place called England. But we're delighted to have him here today, and he's going to be speaking second. So without any further ado, let me hand over to Donald.
Okay. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for being here this morning and hopefully sharing some of our experiences of working Agile and indeed the kind of connection between what we do and helping Scotland's biodiversity. So as said there, I head up the wildlife management team at NatureScot, born and brought up in the Highlands, and luckily I'm privileged really to have nature right on my doorstep in growing up. So really privileged position to be in, really. So I've worked both in the private sector and the public sector for the last 20 years in terms of species and land management. And you know, I've got a keen interest in nature, but also a keen interest in the people who help manage and facilitate that, both in terms of land management and species management. And part of my role is to make sure that we are delivering change, and we'll come on to that in a minute in terms of why there's a need for that change, but we have to take people with us and the use of technology and systems and processes to do that so that we are effective in that. So moving on, just in terms of NatureScot, we are Scotland's nature agency, a public body where we have statutory and regulatory responsibilities and functions, largely relating to nature conservation, protected areas, protected species, but we have wider roles around things like national parks, which you might have heard of in the news recently in Scotland, wider issues around access, recreation, also incentives for delivering that nature throughout Scotland. But in terms of my role, it's largely around wildlife management and working with people to deliver that. But the context in which we operate has changed and is changing in that we have a climate and nature crisis. And I think the public and wider life in general is more focused on climate and nature issues. The whole Attenborough series of films and videos that have been about have increased people's understanding of the kind of nature of the issues that we are facing for climate and biodiversity. And Scotland is an amazing place, really. We've got a bit of everything. We are very fortunate in the wildlife species habitats that we have, but we are also one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So while we are fortunate to have what we have, we could have a lot more, and we want to be a lot better. We are small as a nation, but in terms of our leadership role in world and in the context of that, we are really keen to push above our weight in doing that, in demonstrating what we can do for nature and climate. Our forests and peatlands are particularly important in terms of the carbon aspect of it. Our species and our habitats in terms of biodiversity, some really rare and interesting stuff that we've got here. And what we want to look at is how we developed nature-based solutions to tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis and utilise that, and utilise the skills that we have in terms of our staff and the technology that we bring to that. So really key to do that. In terms of the actual wildlife management role itself, we are involved in a whole range of things, licensing, which we'll touch on in a minute, but around species and people, really, about wanting to live with wildlife effectively so that we can be a better place and integrate more effectively. And in terms of the species that we have a whole range there from very rare species, which are highly protected, to more abundant species, which we need to manage actually to get the best outcomes for nature and climate. In terms of the licensing functions that we have, these are particularly regulatory and statutory functions that we have, and we are responsible for around 90 different licensing types actually, coming from about half a dozen pieces of legislation. Responsibility for species licensing mainly, but some aspects of land management. And this primarily relates to protected species and carry out these functions. To carry out these functions requires a whole series of making sure that we have systems and processes which are effective to do that. And it's in this context in which we have worked closely with Calba to develop our ways of working, using agile methods for delivery, and helping us with this process of particularly around developing the systems that we have for licensing, but the data collection, analysis, and use in that. Building our capacity as an organisation to deliver in an agile way. Obviously, coming from a public sector, that doesn't always chime with our ways of working or ways that we have previously worked. But we are keen to embrace that in terms of looking at this new to us, certainly, approaches in working and how that can best work for us. But we need, as part of wildlife management, to modernise what we're doing for wildlife management, but some of that is in our own internal processes to do that as well. Obviously, we invest a lot in technology in terms of the data and information that we collect, but also making sure that we are efficient, responsive, adaptable, and planning for managing for change. In terms of the specifics of what we'll get into today, and following on from me here, deer management is one of the core areas, along with licensing, species licensing, wildlife crime, and some of the species conflict issues that me and the team, or I and the team deal with. But deer management is a particularly large area of work. And we have 4 species of deer in Scotland, about 1 million deer, and no predators to control them. So it's one of the species that we do have an abundance of in Scotland, but do need managed to make sure that we deliver for biodiversity and nature. For some, it's a sporting resource. For some, it impacts on woodlands and forestry and agriculture. And there are, of course, if any of you drive cars around here, they are a particular concern in terms of public safety as well, in that there are quite a high incidence of deer vehicle collisions in Scotland. So we try to manage that. And to do that effectively, we need to have good underlying data, and we need to have a good regulatory system there to manage the culling process of deer in Scotland. And that's what we've looked to develop over the last year or so. And I think on the back of that, I will pass over to my colleague Paul, who will take us forward in terms of the work that we have undertaken.
I want to talk about kind of how the Agile system hit me and how it changes from the traditional methods that SMEs use. So I'm going to get into a bit of the technical stuff. When it comes to the Agile stuff, that goes way above my head. I can only talk about my life experience, what my experience was delivering DOS, and how we got to where we are. And I think the first thing is, apologies if anybody knows this, but traditional way in sort of commercial sector is that, first of all, you'll conclude when you join a new company, generally it's because there's some sort of emergency and the need to either they're growing too fast and they need new systems, or the systems aren't working and think, oh, we'll get somebody who can sort this out. So the first thing you do is conclude that the existing system is suboptimal. The next bit is you decide that you need a new system to be able to make the company work better. Then you compose a tender document, send it out to prospective suppliers, and it is absolutely amazing. Nobody ever says, no, we can't do that, we're not interested. Everybody says they can do it. Next, choose the supplier from your shortlist, test your operations against the software, go live, find further flaws, bugs, and features, and then listen to everybody moan about the replacement system until you move on to your next role, because either stuff can't be fixed or it's prohibitively expensive. It's quite as simple as that. And for those of you who've dealt with Agile for years, you're either sniggering, and I saw a few sniggers, or those who've come from a commercial sector, you'll be having nightmares and waking up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, I remember those days. The point that I'm trying to make is that in terms of meeting a business need, that traditional system really doesn't work. So I was quite intrigued by the Agile method and what it would entail. But before that, I just want to explain a little bit about how I got to where I was, because I think it's important to understand that whole process of moving from high finance, if you like, in London to where I am now, which is an hour north of Inverness, in the middle of nowhere, beautiful nature, etc. Because effectively, I'd had enough of that whole traditional stuff. I was interested in nature, and then COVID hit, and suddenly I had 3 hours a day where I didn't have to commute. So I went back to school, did a bit of learning, handbrake turn of my career, and ended up as a licensing support officer in NatureScot. And what that meant was that when people heard that I had a bit of system implementation experience, and there was deer as a significant part of my studies, I was sort of almost grabbed by the ear and pulled in to help, and expected to kind of use that experience to deliver a working system to meet our statutory requirements. So I was under no pressure, really. I've got to be honest and say, when I was presented with how Agile worked, I have to say I was horrified. I thought, oh my God, all these daily scrums, these fortnightly reviews, fortnightly retros, fortnightly planning. I just thought, it was almost like your worst nightmare of Yes Minister. And for those who are too young to remember, I can thoroughly recommend accessing it on iPlayer. So as I said, sorry, I've jumped one too far there. Scrums. I think my wife's reaction to this was quite interesting. She said, "What? They check your work every single day?" And I had to explain to her that it never felt like that to me. I think that those short, sharp 15 minutes, first thing in the morning, I don't know how everybody else did it, but that's how we did it, with everybody who's involved in the core team, worked great. They really did. Just kept that focus to deliver what the days and fortnight's tasks, and kept everything just in the loop. I think, however, there is a danger in these scrums that lose focus. Participants don't attend, quick decisions or remedial actions aren't agreed, and issues fester. And I think that was certainly before Mark got involved. That tended to happen a bit. You couldn't get decisions made quickly. But worse still, the people who are needed in the room don't attend when that sort of vicious circle starts to happen. Sprint reviews, I think Mark will touch on this a bit later. We were really transparent about our sprint reviews, recorded them so that anybody in the organisation could watch them afterwards. But in terms of the product owner, it was much more difficult for me to gauge the value of those in terms of what it meant for the team. But it did demonstrate progress to the wider organisation. So, with all due respect, Donald could see that we were actually making progress to hitting our targets and delivering what was required in the sprint. And it actually ensured that work got done. And I likened, certainly for developers, and apologies for the stereotype here for any developers, but my experience of them is they like to work in a darkened room with a towel over their head, just typing away. But actually, these sprint reviews, when you get some positive feedback, it's like a little dopamine hit for them that you get from social media. And I think that that's important to maintain kind of progression and motivation. Obviously, there's a danger that negative feedback in that can disincentivize or demotivate people. But generally, I would argue that it's better to have that criticism after 2 weeks than 3 months, and it just it can be dealt with immediately, effectively. I think one of the key elements for success is that people understand the purpose of the review. I think it undermines confidence and removes motivation if members of the delivery team query and question the delivery in that forum. Mirrors should be held up to those that don't attend scrums. Mark once said, and it rings true, for the core team in the sprint, there should be no surprises. There's a responsibility for those in the delivery team to ask difficult questions, but the sprint isn't it. The retro. And I think the first thing I want to say about the retro is that if they're not difficult, you're not doing it right. They should be a very safe space for people to speak out. And I think that that's quite difficult for some people at the start, particularly when you're new. And some of the early ones were particularly brutal and ended up in tears, and that was just me. But it proved cathartic, and I think once you got those problems and people felt confident speaking out, actually the team dynamic built up better. And I'm reminded of my undergrad sociology days of Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, then performing. And I think, you know, Mark will touch on the stats later, but I think we delivered something pretty decent in the end. I think the danger in those retros is that they could be turned a bit vindictive. Or worse still, is silence. People are afraid to speak up. I never felt they did during the development of DOS. However, the right people aren't in the room at the right time. I've seen them fail, that they're just not as good as they ought to be. I think you've got to be clear that you're there to learn from mistakes, also celebrate success. And if you lose sight of that, it can be really, it'll just be suboptimal, favourite phrase of mine. And then the planning, and by nature, and forgive the pun, I'm a planner. First thing I do on a Monday morning is look at my diary, see what I've got in my diary for that week, match priorities with resources to deliver those. And the agile planning sessions that we had struck me as incredibly well thought out. However, I think one of the key things there is understanding what the priorities are and understanding the difference between important and urgent. I think fundamentally you've got to get that right and understand the difference between the two. Ultimately, though, it's about people. The success or failure of the whole process lies in the people who are there. The delivery manager is critical, and I was lucky enough to work with Mark, who was equally as focused and decisive in his style. The relationship between the product owner and the delivery manager is both a strength and a weakness of the whole agile process, as far as I can see. If either or both are not fully focused, fully equipped to deal with it, then it may even fail altogether. I think it's fair to say that Mark and I occasionally had full and frank exchanges of views. It's amazing how you point into people's chests across the cyberspace. But I think both people have to be brave enough and confident enough to listen. And for the delivery manager, that's particularly difficult because it's the product owner that holds the purse strings. They call the string, but haven't got to be afraid to speak truth to power. My grandmother said, "You're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that proportion." Mark, I hope at least I listened. To sum up, the key to success isn't the agile process itself. You can have as many processes as you like. It's actually about people and teamwork that you can engender in there. And if everybody understands the ultimate goal, agile is a great way to do it. I wouldn't say I'm an evangelist for it yet, but I'm certainly an advocate, and I've moved from skepticism to enthusiast. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. Well, how do I follow that? Well, I think to follow that, we can say that what Paul's touched on is the first agile value, isn't it? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And if we can focus on the individuals and interactions, we're going to go a long way to success. But before we get to that success, I want to just take you through the journey and the problem that we were trying to solve with NatureScot. And the problem we were trying to solve was quite a complex one, in that the legacy system we established was not fit for purpose. It was inefficient. It was wildlife staff were spending time doing admin, and they weren't out doing compliance in the field. We needed a system that was online, that would allow deer management staff to do registrations, apply for authorizations to manage the deer, and to record the data back, as Donald says, to get that analysis for the strategic objectives and doing long-term planning. But we must also deliver the statutory functions of NatureScot and comply with everything at the level of the Scottish Government, and also work with key stakeholders, landholders and the conservationists, sometimes not both seeing the same side of the argument. And then it also has to comply with digital services from Scotland. So we had to think about being mobile first, we had to think about accessibility, and of course, our old friend GDPR. And as Calba associates, we were keen to make sure that staff are upskilled. We were looking to help them understand the Agile values, to understand the Agile principles and live the Agile practices in the work. And not only the staff, because for we had to recruit other members as well who had specialist skills. So we recruited content designers, service designer, and Agile BAs. And the killer line for us was, it all must be delivered on a fixed timescale. In for the 31st of March, no questions, no ifs, no buts. I don't know about you, but when I saw that, I was horrified. So how did we go about achieving it? Well, we were very lucky to have Donald leading us through it. We had a very clear North Star. We had a very clear intent. As Carl Scotland said in his speech before, that North Star, or the true north, really helped us galvanize the team and all work for a common purpose. We wanted to be able to make sure we delivered on our requirements, but in the Agile way. We didn't want to necessarily follow the plan. We wanted to be responsive to change. So we had to help take people on that journey of understanding the difference in the processes and the methods. We needed to think about what and understand our MVP, our minimum viable product. What was it that we could deliver early? What is it that we must deliver at the deadline? And what could we possibly deliver after the deadline but still meet all the requirements? And working closely with Paul, we were able to understand the difference between all three of those. And then we also worked closely with other wildlife officers. One of the principles that you hear, you don't hear often about Taylorism. Taylorism was the scientific management of work. But actually, if you read Taylorism, what he said is, if it can be improved by the people who are doing the work, we should do that. We should allow that process improvement. So Kaizen was way back in Taylorism as well. And so working with Jimmy Irvin, we were able to look at a particular process in the registration and look at the data entry in that and take that data entry process from 10 pages to 3. And that was really, really helpful in getting simplicity in the system, because by getting simplicity in the system, we were living another Agile value, another Agile principle. We were trying to maximize the work not done. So collaboration and team building. So through this process, we were keen to work with NatureScot and help them build the team and collaborate successfully. If you've been at the stand in Calba, you've seen there's some red balls around, and we do a red ball game where we encourage communication. We have another workshop that we run around moving coins to increase flow. And this one was around the product in a box, helping people understand what do they just really need to be able to deliver and how do they communicate that and work together to achieve that. But as I mentioned before, working with Jimmy and working at the coalface directly with people is one sort of collaboration, but we want to work with everybody everywhere. So we had our content designer, Sophie, supporting that process. And Sophie allowed us to take that process that we mapped out with Jimmy and also include accessibility, complete the privacy policy, bring in the concept of the GDPR and how we were going to manage that as well. And then additionally, like the weather, teams are always changing. It's always in flux. So we had to think about onboarding new staff. We were very, very fortunate to have two new colleagues join us from Code Clan, Rory and Helen. I don't know if, could you raise your hands if you know of Code Clan and what that's about? 50-50. So Code Clan is a 16-week intensive program for mature and experienced individuals who've worked in the workplace elsewhere, and then they switch into tech. 16 weeks to switch into tech. 4 months, less than 1 quarter. These individuals arrived in our team and they brought with them a diversity of thinking. They brought with them cognitive diversity that allowed us to have new ideas about the way we were going to do it and what we were going to do. And it was a real advantage having them along. So we wanted to think about the creativity and the empowerment that we were doing in it. And in terms of the creativity, we leveraged that diversity of thought to come up with lots of different options about how we could do things. And then we used the convergent thinking to come down to the solution that we were going to deliver. But we also wanted to look at the data to allow data-driven decision-making as well. I think I better have a glass of water. So the data decision-making was really useful because we had legacy data from the old system. And in that, what we established was 20% of the people using the system in any particular year were new customers. That was the new process. But 80% of them were returns. They were coming back, renewals. So we already had their data. So immediately we could pivot and understand the priority was around the renewals, bringing in the existing data, improving the efficiency of the system by reducing transcription errors, reducing the time for users, and making it a much easier, faster, and simpler process for them. We also were really fortunate to have some sort of innovation and continuous improvement. So one of the things that we brought into the NatureScot domain was the gov.uk prototype kit. It had never been used before, but with the gov.uk prototype kit, we were able to build out pages, not just pages on their own, but also navigation through those pages, and then ultimately into data flow. So you have a wonderful system that users can interact with. So working with our BA, Craig Dickman, we were able to build that for the fit and competent process and allow users to experience it. Not just the users, but the devs. And the devs were even able to use the Nunjux code produced to help build them out the actual application. The only difficulty was, when we presented in a few weeks the prototype kit, the business was saying, fabulous, it looks like it's there. And I had the job of explaining it was smoke and mirrors, and it was all a front end, and there was nothing in the back, and we still had to build out the application. Other examples of continuous improvement or Kaikaku, more radical change, was introducing a GIS element into the system. Previously, when the cull returns were coming, the information about the deer was given to another team. This other team with GIS specialists with specialist knowledge and skills around data analysis were keying in information into a GIS system. But by shifting that process left, making that available online in the staff UI for the wildlife officers, they did the work up front, allowing the specialists in GIS to do the data analysis and provide the reports for the strategic goals of NatureScot. And Paul mentioned about the sprint review process. Another innovation we brought in for our continuous improvement was around the use of recording of the videos. That felt a little uncomfortable for some, but we got used to it. But the benefit was for those who were unable to attend and retrospectively could play catch up. And in fact, for the first time on Wednesday while I was here, I was able to take advantage of that catch up and watch the video myself. So what was the result of all this effort and this agile process and way of working? Well, we had 3 incremental deliveries. The first one, ahead of time. And one of the complexities with delivering a legacy system and a data migration from on-prem to cloud is that there could be no downtime. No time could the system be offline. So we ended up with a parallel system for a period because we wanted to go early and experiment. We wanted to build, measure, and learn. And in that build, measure, learn cycle, we did it through the alpha, through the prototype, we did it through private beta testing, and then we did it when the system was in production. And it was wonderful to see that through the feedback we got through that process, we had a 97% satisfaction rate. And Paul remembers some wonderful examples of the feedback we got. One of the feedbacks was, is that it? And there was a huge nervousness in the community about how they were going to go through a registration, how many forms they're going to fill in, how long would it take? And that was the feedback, is that it? Another bit of feedback we got from somebody was, this is a person who's a stalker. They're walking in the Highlands, they're out in the fields, they carry a rifle, you know, they're active people. They don't want to sit down and do stuff on either on their phones or their laptops necessarily. But what he said was, as a hammer and spanners type of guy, It was really easy, and even I could do it. So that was really rewarding. And then we delivered the authorization element, the second element of the service, and it was delivered ahead of the schedule, but when Donald went to present to the annual general conference of the deer managers in Scotland. So we looked at the schedule and we understood where the political win was having that opportunity, and we were able to shift the schedule and make it work through the Agile process. So Donald was able to go there and not say to the people, we're going to do this. He was able to say, it's here, it's live, and you can use it. There was some groundbreaking innovations, bringing that GIS system into it, which was really wonderful. Working with colleagues, Mena and Gabor, they were able to do that. Some of the other innovations we were able to bring was in terms of AWS. We understood the need for emergent architecture, and the emergent architecture allowed us to leverage AWS RDS technology, which had never been used before in NatureScot. And through that, they were able to leverage Power BI, and one of our colleagues, Erin, was able to produce reports. And these reports are user reports that previously would have to be delivered by a dev. So therefore, saving dev time and bringing the reporting, again, shifting it left to where the users are. We also brought in AWS well-architected framework, and Paul Cox, our senior dev, was working on the security pillar to ensure the service was secure by ensuring engineering excellence. And through that, I can confidently report back that when we did the penetration testing, there were no major errors found. Yes, there were some minors and there were some tweaks. Nobody gets it right. Well, I don't know if somebody gets it right first time, but we didn't get it right first time, but we were happy to iterate and learn. And finally, the full migration of the system and the shutdown of the data was done on schedule, and the final increment was delivered in agreement with the product owner through negotiation just after that transition happened, because the final element wasn't going to be required until a little bit further on down the line. So we had, that was in defining the MVP, we could work out what actually needed to be delivered and when. So, lessons learned. Was it plain sailing? Was it all smiley, happy faces? No. I think Paul said at times it was challenging, at times there was confrontation, but we had to work through it as a team. What did we learn through that? Well, individually, we learned that we should maybe have had some, it would be better if we could have had more time. Maybe if we could maximize even more the work we didn't do and give individuals some more time to learn, more time to experiment, more time to fail in a safe environment and feel comfortable in their growth. Maybe within the team, we learned that we needed more frequent, short conversations. It was better to have those conversations, even if they're difficult, than let them fester and lie for too long. And organizationally, in building a multidisciplinary team, we had individuals from across the organization from different silos who are managed by different line managers, reported to different KPIs, and were not necessarily all aligned together. And so what we learned is that we needed to get together the senior leaders to make sure that the vision that we had, the North Star and the intent, was shared with those senior leaders from other divisions, from where those other people came from in the multidisciplinary team. And working with Nick, in particular, on the service design was really important for us, maximizing the whole user journey and understanding the service from end to end. So what's next? Well, red grouse, another license type. And since we've done the Deer Online service, that service has now been built and developed. And Ian Tully's sitting with us today as the delivery manager and delivered that for us. So thanks, Ian, and the team. Next, there's going to be Muirburn. And then after that, there's the next one. And after that, there'll be the next one. So maybe, is there an opportunity for Kai Ka Shin, a radical shift, a doing it a different way, rather than building individual online services, but thinking about how we could do something quite different? That's on the business side. But on the tech side, just raise your hand if you were here yesterday and heard the keynote from Sarah Sue on green software. What do we think? Do you share my enthusiasm in thinking that was wonderful? Yeah, it was a wonderful explanation of why we need green ops, why we need green software. She explained that currently $26 billion is wasted in the cloud on infrastructure that's running, that's redundant, either being built to test, built to build a system that's shut down and people are too frightened to switch it off. How she described it, and I'll use her term, was an IKEA product. You've invested all that time into building it and it's sitting in the corner. Maybe after a while you're not using it, but you're not going to throw it away because you've invested in it. The sunk cost becomes too much. Holly Cummins came up with a great phrase. Holly Cummins says, it should be light switch ops. When we leave the office, the development environment goes down. When we go away for the weekend, all the environments that aren't production just go down. And only things running in the cloud are live when they need to be live. And what we did is we did some data analysis ourselves. And working with David Carboni and Aaron Chav, another developer, we built 3 sets of infrastructure to try and experiment with this. An infrastructure that's 24/7 and runs in the cloud. An infrastructure that only runs when the users interact. What we established was, and that over 97%, coincidentally the same 97% statistic that I used earlier, 97% of the users of the system were only using the system between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., the corner shop hours at Spa. Yeah? So why don't we run the service between those hours and then spin it down at the end and maybe leave a web page up that says, we're not going to take your data because we're thinking about the climate and environment and you can come back online. Or maybe there's another way. Maybe you could capture the data, not process it, but then spin up the architecture in the morning, process it, and then service the user. Either way. But the third option was using a different, newer technology called serverless. And serverless means it's not running in the cloud until you press the button. Then the service comes online, and it's instant. The user interacts with the service is finished, the user interaction is over, and the service spins down until your next user. Now, clearly, if you're Skyscanner, if you're Amazon, there's an inflection point about the number of users. But for NatureScot, for many services in the UK, Scottish Government, they could be thinking about a serverless architecture in a different way. What next? Maybe a little bit of joy. How do we bring in a little bit of joy? Maybe that's the question I would ask you. How do we bring in a little bit of joy to our work, to our homes, and to our lives in this agile process? Thank you very much for your time today. We'd love to take your questions if you have any questions. Dan? Oh dear, question at the back.
Hi, Mark.
Donald, if you'd like to stand there. Thank you.
Firstly, really inspiring because I know a lot of us have been beaten around the head with Agile and its value to organizations. I'm certainly sitting here after a week of just that bashing. So really, really good.
Thank you.
What I liked as well was this question about an immutable deadline. And often it's part of the challenge we get it with Agile and the adults, as they like to call themselves, at the high ups in the organization. How much did that create real tension in your team to get to that deadline in a way that didn't compromise? It sounded like you had a few things going on with some confrontation and so on. Was that part of it?
Yes, and I think I would credit Paul. I would credit Paul Main for understanding the requirements as a product owner and negotiating that process. So as we got nearer the deadline, we could understand the complexity, we could understand the amount and the scale and size of the work we were doing, and we could see if we were going to make it and if we weren't. And Paul was very good at making those decisions about, well, actually, maybe this bit here, we can just deliver after. Yeah? And that negotiation, as he says, spirited, was really helpful. But having a very clear and decisive product owner, I think, helped the team understand what was the art of the possible.
Can I just chip in there? 'Cause I think that one thing that's crucial to understand is, I was de facto the product owner, but I actually wasn't. It was my immediate boss, and my immediate boss reports into Donald. But I felt empowered to take those decisions and confident to take those decisions. And I think don't want to talk out of turn, but I think potentially prior to me getting involved, the people either didn't have the time, had too much other things going on to be able to take those focused decisions, and didn't feel confident enough to take instant decisions. And I think if the person in the room who's responsible for those doesn't feel that higher up the chain they're going to get backed, I said to Donald yesterday that the decision to delay one of the little bits yesterday, when it was first put to him, if I could have captured his face and look of horror at that time, as soon as I explained it was fine, and I'd already explained it to my line manager why I was taking it, but I felt empowered to do that. And I think that that's critical. If the people in the room don't feel empowered and think, oh, I've got to go and consult somebody else, that instantly puts a delay in, which is going to impact on the deadline.
Thanks for the question. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Fantastic to see Agile being used in a sector I wouldn't expect it. Really fantastic. I'm really curious because being a product owner is a difficult role, and that label is one thing, but your lessons learned at the beginning that you went through and what it felt like from a human perspective. I just love that. Like you said, your wife said, you check the work every day, but what did it feel like in NatureScot? These consultants or this partner coming in, showing you a different way to work. What did it feel like you and outside of in NatureScot?
It's quite a tough question. I'm really only 21. I just had a hard life. But my line manager once said to me very early on, he said, I trust you because you're not a first-year graduate. And I think that the experience that I brought gave me a certain level of confidence to be able to, talk truth to power. So I was quite happy to kind of have full and frank exchange upwards, but also across the way. And there's one particular exchange which I won't repeat here, which Mark and I had, but I thought it was kind of pivotal in our understanding. And I think that I was quite comfortable taking his advice, but ultimately I was the one that's right. I wasn't, because I'm so low down, but ultimately it was fundamentally me that was writing the check. And so if I wanted to tell him to sling his hook, I could, but hopefully I never did that. Because I think the power is in winning that argument and impressing upon them. I hate pulling rank. And so in terms of feeling, the biggest thing for me, a really personal thing, was moving from a really kind of dynamic small, medium enterprise thing to then suddenly come into a public sector where, there's much more understanding of personal well-being and what have you. And I found that really difficult. To me, my mindset for all my working life prior to this was, there's a job to be done, you get one and you do it until it's done. Whereas there's just a different mindset. And I think that was, you asked me about my personal feelings. That took me quite a while to kind of get over, if I'm brutally honest. Delighted now. I mean, 3-hour commute versus 5 minutes, can't whack it.